Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lupus, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is former Secretary of Education and the President and CEO of the Bipartisan Policy Center, Margaret Spellings. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brittany. Glad to be here.
President Donald Trump last month signed an executive order to close the Department of Education. As the department's former secretary, what's your reaction to the news?
Well, I have a lot of questions about it, as you might imagine. Is there work to do to make the Department of Education more efficient? Of course there is. Here we are in the high season of college admissions and, a lot to do. And in the aftermath of an education report card that says we're not doing very well on student achievement. So I want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the ball of making improvements there above all.
And you served as the education secretary under President Bush, and one of his big pillars was no child left behind. As we know, the Department of Education was started by Jimmy Carter, the president, in 1979. What exactly is the Department of Education responsible for?
That's a great question, and I think really misunderstood a lot. The federal role actually started in the during the Great Society LBJ era, which with the thesis that we had a federal interest in making sure that there was opportunity for everyone across this country, irrespective of zip code or geography. And so we started in on that, and these programs, Title I for low-income students, IDEA for special education students, financial supports on the higher ed side of the house, Pell Grants, and then loan programs to make sure that the opportunity for higher education was more readily available. So that's essentially what the federal government has been doing and does. Fast forward to No Child Left Behind, as you rightly say, President Bush believed, as I do, that if we're going to spend federal money, we ought to get something for it. We ought to know how we're doing. We ought to chart our progress over time. And so things like the National Education Report Card, requirements for states to measure against their own curriculums every year in reading and math, has been an important reform that in the short term, between 2000 and 2015, really was driving student achievement in the right direction. It has since stagnated and fallen after that big ascendancy.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because as we know, 5 years after 2015, you see COVID, you see kids going home, learning from home. Subsequently, you're seeing test scores drop, and those test scores now, I have to say, are pretty alarming. So do you think that, given the time we're in now, do you think that this is the right move to shutter the Department of Education?
Well, one of the things that I have real, concerns about or questions about is, we've got to keep the main thing the main thing. What is our most urgent problem right now? And the most urgent thing, obviously, are the things that you mentioned, the stagnant and dropping, especially for disadvantaged students, their achievement in reading and math. And so what I see around the country, whether it's those SBA that runs the student loan program or the Department of Education, does that aid and help us keep that focus on student achievement or not? That's my question. And so really the declines in student achievement started before COVID. There are some reasons for that. The federal government, really was paying less attention to the progress and allowed states to kind of do things in a looser way. So anyway, I think what we have learned over time is that when you use the federal role in a way that really is discreet and respects state prerogatives, we can improve student achievement.
And this executive order, President Trump says, hey, I want to essentially turn over the responsibilities of education to the individual states. And the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, she said this in a statement, quote, education is fundamentally a state responsibility. Instead of filtering resources through layers of federal red tape, we will empower states to take charge and advocate for and implement what is best for students, families, and educators in their communities. What's your reaction to her characterization of that? And what do you think education will look like in this country if it is returned to the states?
Education is in the states and with local school districts, absolutely. So we can declare victory right now that it is not against the law for states to improve student achievement. And I would like to see, and I think it's a very legitimate conversation, what are the things that governors believe are impeding their ability to make progress? I've worked for two governors, I've worked around two state legislatures. That's not what I heard. In fact, what I heard is when the federal government is keeping us focused on student achievement in reading and math, we were making progress. So let's get the list of those things that are keeping governors from driving student achievement forward and go to work on them if that's the case.
And what would be your advice right now to Secretary Linda McMahon here? Because I know in November you did say, hey, that's a good pick. Do you still think that now, A? And B, what's your advice to her today?
Sure. I mean, I think she is someone who has worked in the federal government. She's run an agency. She's a skilled businesswoman. She understands the role of Congress. I hear her often say, that Congress is a major player and party to this conversation, and I think she's well aware of that. So, I stand by and support President Trump's, support and selection of her. But, she's going to have to do her job in the context of the reality of the Congress and states and local governments. And, time will tell how that all plays out.
Education, especially in COVID and beyond now, the past 5 years, has really become a top issue for voters. What do you think, as someone who has a really great perspective here, as the former Secretary of Education, what do you think is really missing from the national dialogue when it comes to education in this country?
Well, I think, I used to say, if half the planes that, flew into, LaGuardia fell from the sky, people would be very outraged. If half the lunches served in our school lunch program were tainted, people would be on fire. The fact that half the kids can't read in our neediest communities seems not to bother people so much. So how do we return the urgency and focus around student achievement to make sure that we have an educated and prepared workforce that can drive our economy forward? Our country, it will only lead if we tap into the human capital and human potential of every single one of our people. And so we got to get about that.
And I know that you said we can declare victory. Education is returned to the states. But if President Trump, I know he signed that executive order, but if Congress does pass this, if the Department of Education really is effectively dismantled, do you think that will impact different communities and different states differently?
Well, for starters, what I am hearing is they're not suggesting that these programs be eliminated, but merely relocated so that the programs exist in different federal places and federal buildings and federal agencies than they do today. And so if I'm a school superintendent or a governor or university president, as I have been, is it cheaper and more effective and less bureaucratic for me to be dealing with HHS, the Department of Justice on civil rights, the SBA on student lending, whoever, the Department of Labor, and on and on? Is that more effective, more efficient, more productive, or does it keep us from really focusing on that super urgent need of student achievement?
And I know that at the top of this conversation, you say you have a lot of questions right now about this executive order. What is your top question that you want answered immediately?
Well, I think the first thing I would ask, if I could maybe have a two-parter, is, do we still have a shared thesis, a shared belief that education ought to be widely and broadly available, and that it is a big part of leveling the playing field and providing opportunity for the American dream to everyone anywhere? Do we believe that? That has been our shared thesis for a very long time. If that's the case, then the next question is, how do we achieve results for the investments we're making, and how might we do that best? So when I hear things about, gutting of the National Education Report Card and those research parts of the department, does that help us guide the way to better student achievement or not? So I think we start with, what are we trying to do and how are we going to do it?
Secretary Margaret Spellings, I really appreciate your perspective here, your insight. Thank you so much. And as we do get updates as for what's next in education in this country, I hope you come back on and join me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.